Hi, I'm the Reverend Naomi King, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the issue of perfection. Now, if you grew up Christian, you are Christian, or you have just been around the wallpaper in the living room of American culture, which is Protestantism, you may have had Matthew 5:48 quoted at you as though it's a weapon. Be perfect, therefore, as your Father in heaven is perfect. Let's sigh it off. That's a big, tall order. Somehow, human beings, finite and limited as we are, learning and imperfect as we are supposed to have this sense of perfection. Unfortunately, this is one of those words that has a slightly different meaning in the Greek than what it is translated as perfect in English. Thank you to the King James Version translators for that one. And there's a difference in that it's supposed to mean fullness. So listen to that verse entirely differently if you're asked to be full as your God in heaven is full. Wow, that's a different state of being together. I can do fullness. I can be aware of all the different feelings that are going on in me and how full I am of those, or the sensations that are happening and full of that, or I can be full of gratitude, or full of wonder, or full of love. And in that moment, that fullness is not different than that perfection. So if we look at this idea of perfection as really being a fullness, like a cup is full, or a cup is partly empty and therefore less perfect somehow, there's an openness, a spaciousness to it, then maybe we can be a little less judgmental of ourselves and others in understanding this notion of perfection. I often felt like, as I was growing up, that if I just did exactly the right things, nothing bad would happen. And I know lots and lots of people for whom that's still true. And there are moments when that's true for me, where I feel like if I just do the exact right thing, bad things will stop happening or won't happen at all. And that's not actually so. There are things that we can affect, and it's good to know what those are. That's part of the practice of discernment. And the stuff that we can't affect. So just having a specific routine or having a set of beliefs where everything, if I'm just somehow more perfect, more like God, then nothing bad will happen, right? Because if I were God next Tuesday for 7.5 seconds, then all of this stuff would end that's bad. This is the part for a lot where a lot of people who used to be theists get off the bus. And for those who continue to be theists, you really have to struggle with that. This idea that there is suffering, and yet somehow a God of love has a world in which there is suffering. And some people have answered that by saying, well, the suffering's brought in by the devil, but then you still have to ask, if God's all powerful, well, why the devil? And some people have answered that by saying, well, how would we know what's good if we didn't have what's bad? And there's truth to that as well. And some people have answered with a process theology response, which is, well, God's done so much, and then it's our responsibility as human beings to do more. And I come down a little bit closer to that end of the spectrum of theisms, in case anybody's wondering where I am theologically, because I do feel like what we do matters. Otherwise, I wouldn't spend so much time around spiritual practices, because if what we did spiritually and for our practices and how we were with one another didn't matter, then why have those? Just go along, live your life, be as horrible or as great as you want to be, and it doesn't matter. I'm not that kind of a predestinarian, and I'm not that kind of a theist. And so I come back to this question of, because these are all rooted in our sense of what is God and what is our sense of perfection. Is your sense of perfection a most beautiful cake? Is it a particularly glorious sunset? Is it a moment of pleasure that continues to unfold and unfold and unfold? Is it the absence of suffering, or the absence of fear, or anger, or want, or hunger? Is it a sense of well-being? So let's give a thought to what we can do to be full and perfect in that way in each moment, recognizing that sometimes that fullness might be things we don't understand and we don't necessarily appreciate much, like a fullness of fear, or a fullness of pain, or a fullness of irritation and anger. Perhaps even to me saying that right now, as though life can exist without those things. It's not been my experience. My experience is that life has suffering, struggle, pain, anger, fear, and also love, joy, goodness, graciousness, thanksgiving, wonder, reverence. Lots and lots of beautiful aspects of our lives to be full of, right alongside of the fullness of the other stuff. I'm not going to be the person who answers the question about God or God's nature. I'm too small for that. I'm not big enough to imagine what is unimaginable, named unnamed, and something that is so beyond my being, but also is part of my being. So I'll touch back at what I can and turn to what I can understand and appreciate, which is how much my life changes and differs by becoming full of love and generosity and compassion, and how that eases the suffering, not only for me, but for others as I interact with them and as they interact with me, and we have a chance to exchange and create and nurture together a ground of well-being. Now, you say we're socially distancing at the moment, and maybe by the time you watch this video, we no longer will have to be doing that. But even if we are apart from one another, how we greet each other, how we are together matters. And that's the fullness that I turn my life towards. I wonder how you turn yours and how you practice your fullness. If you can, I invite you to let go of standards of perfection that are beyond the human, and instead practice standards of fullness, a full breath, a full joy, a full thankfulness in this day and always. Thanks for joining me.